Hello and welcome to our Power BI webinar. For those listening in other time zones, we welcome you by saying a few hellos in different languages. G'day, kia ora, yasas, konnichiwa, ni hao, ciao, zdravo, ahoy, aloha, shalom, marhaba, salut, bonjour, assalamu alaikum, hello, privet, hoida, hola, saomona, and bao. Thank you so much for joining us today. We do want to also let you know that Microsoft and the Power BI team, of course, would like to express our sincere support and sympathy for folks who are currently affected in the COVID-19 situation. We would especially like to thank our first responders, our nurses, doctors, EMTs, volunteers, and all of those who are at the front lines, the delivery folks at the front lines who are helping us to stay home and stay safe. Thank you very much, everyone. With that, I'd love to welcome you today to a wonderful webinar we're having. We have the fantastic Christian Wade, who's going to be speaking to us today about Power BI Premium as a superset of analysis services, the Readwrite XMLA endpoint. This is by far the biggest feature we're releasing. So with that, Christian, take us away.
Thank you very much indeed, Kelly. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Christian Wade. I'm the program management lead for analysis services, which includes not only SQL Server analysis services and Azure analysis services, but also bringing the analysis services features, capabilities, and workloads to Power BI Premium. Hence the title Power BI Premium as a superset of analysis services. So making Power BI a superset of analysis services could be phrased as another question, which is why Converge enterprise and self-service BI? You know, for those of you who don't know, we at Microsoft, we have a deep heritage in enterprise BI. Analysis services is actually 20 years old now. We are the only vendor in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for BI and analytic platforms to be ranked in the Leaders Quadrant for not 5 years, not 10 years, but for 13 years in a row. And 13 years ago, it was all about enterprise BI, which is a real testament to our heritage in the enterprise BI space. So when I talk about enterprise BI, I'm talking about business intelligence systems that are owned and managed by IT for centralized, large-scale business intelligence deployments with users all over the world, potentially with a small number of really large, really complex models with high scalability requirements and application lifecycle management requirements for mission-critical systems and those types of things. So when we first launched Power BI, about 5 years or so ago, it was primarily for self-service BI, and we had traditionally, at that time, positioned enterprise and self-service BI as two kind of separate camps with two separate products. And as these products have matured, we and the industry have realized that it's not really as clear-cut as enterprise and self-service BI. They're really like two ends of the spectrum, and most business intelligence systems fall somewhere in between. And if you look at the life cycle of a business intelligence artifact, quite often an analyst will make a really interesting discovery, it gets popular, the data loads get too much to manage, and it needs to be handed over to IT for centralized BI to be productionized, to be harvested and reviewed and integrated with information architecture and alignment with corporate naming standards and integrated into these large enterprise semantic models for general consumption. Now, that process is much more difficult when you have to bridge the gap between the two camps. And we've seen this time and time again with our customers over when we first started on this about 5 years ago with Power BI, because really we are quite uniquely positioned in that we have such a deep heritage in enterprise BI, but we're also really I think it's very fair to say that we are the only traditional business intelligence vendor to really embrace self-service BI really early on with Power BI. So we are uniquely positioned to execute on this vision for the convergence of enterprise and self-service BI. Right, and so it's really going to help the migration between the two camps and promote that business agility. So the vision is going to allow for a one-stop shop, an all-inclusive platform, allowing customers to co-locate business intelligence artifacts in a single, easily accessible location, the Power BI Workspace. And then the key point here is that these systems will have native access to all of the richness, all of the goodness in Power BI in terms of the enterprise business intelligence features, which are only available in Power BI. And it's just going to avoid those problems of trying to bridge the gap. It'll be simpler messaging. It'll avoid migration across the two products, and it will just help promote collaboration between the business and IT to really streamline that workflow from self-service BI to centralized BI. Okay, so that is the vision. And so this is where we, technically we were in this position as of November of last year. And as you can see, you've got an Azure Analytic Services and Power BI Premium. And there is so much goodness on the right-hand side that our enterprise business intelligence customers want to access. Things like incremental refresh policies for simplified management experiences, and composite models and aggregations for petabyte scale analytics to unlock these massive data sets. We've got enhanced security that's landing this summer. Things like shared and certified data sets and Synapse integration and data protection in terms of first-class integration with Microsoft Cloud App Security based on Microsoft information protection labels, just like Microsoft Office documents, and data lineage, Azure Data Catalog integrations coming soon. There's so much goodness on the right-hand side, and the customers who've had to choose Azure AS can kind of feel a bit they want access to all of the goodness in Power BI, right? And so a lot of the customers have had to choose Azure Analytic Services historically because they need some of the features that up until now only Azure Analytic Services could support. Things like source control integration, and advanced semantic modeling. Well, as of November of last year, at Ignite, we launched the large models feature, which allows Power BI datasets. We launched it for Power BI Premium, so Power BI datasets can go beyond the 10 gigabyte limit. And as of today, we are very happy to announce, very excited to announce the big one, the XMLA endpoint read-write capability, which is going to open up so many analysis services scenarios in Power BI. This is truly the biggest pillar of all, in terms of the analysis services tools and processes and semantic modeling. In the near future, we will also launch, this summer, the plan is that we will launch Azure Log Analytics integration for Power BI to give you that fine-grain logging to figure out, who's using the system, which users are placing a strain on the system, what's the health of the system, and for auditing purposes, etc. And in the near future, I don't have a time frame right now, but in the near future, we will be addressing the bottom three as well. So in the very near future, we will be in this position, right, which allows customers. And even as of today, with the XMLA endpoint, a lot of the key scenarios are covered, allowing customers to choose to start projects straight in Power BI so that they have all of the capabilities that Azure Analytic Services has, plus everything else that you get in Power BI Premium, all right, and not have to bridge the gap between the two worlds, all right. So the one that we're launching today, as I said, is the XMLA endpoint read-write capability. So for those of you who don't know, a Power BI dataset literally runs on an analysis services instance in the back end, right? So what the XMLA endpoint does, the XMLA endpoint is a protocol that was defined a long time ago. It's a real testament to our heritage in enterprise BI. We defined the protocol for enterprise BI that so many other vendors use. It's an open standard protocol. that allows business intelligence client tools to interact with analysis services. We open it up for Power BI, and all of the analysis services tools and processes suddenly all are supported with Power BI datasets. Things like SQL Server data tools for semantic modeling, and the ability, because it runs in Visual Studio, gives you integration with source control, and therefore you have integration with Azure DevOps for automated build and deployment and CI/CD, and you can run the analysis services deployment wizard and PowerShell commandlets for automation, you know, from Azure Automation. All of those scenarios suddenly light up. People don't realize how powerful the XMLA, how many tentacles the XMLA endpoint actually has, how many tools and processes the XMLA endpoint actually touches, right? We have SQL Server Management Studio for scripting and fine-grained refresh and dataset management, Profiler for debugging. We have community tools like Tabular Editor, and Analysis Services has a rich history of community tools that now all work with Power BI datasets. And even non-Microsoft data visualization tools can now connect to a Power BI dataset as though it were an analysis services model for data visualization. You may ask, why would you even want to do that? Well, there are some conceivable scenarios. You know, if you're rolling out a Power BI dataset as a corporate semantic model with users all over the world in different departments, it's quite likely that there may be certain pockets of users in certain departments that are still using non-Microsoft data visualization tools or not using Power BI. They could even be using Excel, for example. And so we are confident that those users over time will gravitate to Power BI once they to Power BI as a data visualization tool once they fully understand the value proposition of Power BI as a data visualization tool. But in the meantime, that's okay. You know, we can still roll out this corporate semantic model that is used by users all over the world in different departments. It's not a problem. You know, we are confident that the Power BI will attract the users that need to go to Power BI in the long term. You can roll out this corporate semantic model and promote that single version of the truth for enterprise business intelligence scenarios. Okay, so that's the XMLA endpoint. This is really the big one. I can't emphasize enough how many of these analysis services, tools, and processes will now work as of today. We are launching this feature today. It is live as of about an hour ago. So help yourselves. All right, let's see. Another feature I'd like to highlight is the large models feature. Just give me one moment, please. So the large models feature we launched at Ignite in November, and it gives you dataset size parity with Azure Analysis Services for Power BI Premium datasets, which means that the dataset size is limited only by the capacity size. The Power BI Premium capacities are roughly comparative in terms of the memory restrictions to the Analysis Services SKUs. So you are no longer limited by the artificial 10 GB limit that used to be in Power BI Premium. And so with that, I'm going to jump into some demos to show you all of this good stuff, but I thought I might pause just for a moment. Kelly and Deepak, if there are any burning questions, we can take a couple now, and then I'll leave at least 5 minutes at the end for further questions. Deepak, Kelly, are you there?
Hi, sorry, I unmuted. I was actually
no problem. No problem.
While I was muted. My apologies. Yes, we do. We're starting to get weird requests like, I want to put a data flow into an XMLA endpoint into the service. What is your advice on how to contrast the XMLA endpoint from a regular flat data source?
Okay, so the XMLA endpoint really is focused on the Power BI dataset because it's really focused on the analysis services capabilities, which is really the raw analysis services dataset engine. So we are working on other capabilities for management of data flows, like the deployment pipelines will at some point include data flows, but really the XMLA endpoint is focused just on the dataset.
Fantastic. We also have a question that asks, Pro supports, like I'm assuming Power BI Pro, supports live connection and analyze in Excel, which would be using XMLA read. Is that right? And any chance we would be able to connect to other tools like DAX Studio to Datasets in a Pro workspace on a read-only basis?
Yeah, that's a fair question. As read-only access, that is something we are considering that we could do in terms of the technical capability. At the moment, we are focusing on getting XMLA and large models to general availability. We will revisit that later. There are technical reasons why we would not enable read-write access on Pro workspaces, but we may enable read-only access at some point, but I don't have a time frame for that right now.
Fantastic. And then the next question is, would this also open up Power BI datasets to extract the data using an API?
Absolutely. That's exactly the types of things you can do. You know, analytic services is so rich in terms of APIs. You have APIs for extracting metadata, figuring out what data sets are in the service, and then what are the tables in the data set, what are the columns in the data set, you know, and querying those data sets, and even the automation of you know, creating data sets and managing data sets. All of those tools that we saw, like SQL Server Management Studio and SQL Server Data Tools, and all of those things use the client libraries that go through the XMLA endpoint. So they're all simply XMLA clients, and you can create your own using the Tabular object model, which is an API for creation and management of Power BI data sets that it hasn't been inherited from analytic services. So absolutely, the API surface area is increasing dramatically. Even PowerShell commandlets for Azure automation and things like that. Absolutely, the API surface area is and Tabular model scripting language for scripting. There are just so many new APIs that are being opened up today, and I will provide some links at the end for documentation for you to get further info.
Excellent, excellent. We have another question,
Sure.
which is, will the Readwrite endpoint premium have any impact on the Pro services? For example, availability of a read-only endpoint?
It shouldn't have any impact on what is available right now, and this may be another instance of the question we answered earlier, which is that we could over time enable read-only XMLA access on Pro capacities, but we don't have a time frame for that right now.
Okay, we have about three more questions.
Sure.
In the future, will any scenario require using Azure Analysis Services for Power BI?
Depending on the features, no. We will have full feature coverage. In fact, we would strongly recommend to customers to get over to Power BI, because the investment's going to continue in Power BI, and the differentiators are only going to get bigger and bigger in Power BI. So we would strongly recommend to customers to get over to Power BI. It's more strategic. You know, there are certain things that work slightly differently in Power BI, like the gateway model is slightly different, and the security model is slightly different. So the sooner you get over there, and you know, as the Mandalorian would say, this is the way. Well, it's the Power BI way. Right? Do things the Power BI way. Follow the Mandalorian guidance, and this is the way. It's the Power BI way. So absolutely, in terms of all the features, you know, Power BI will soon be a true superset of analysis services. We absolutely recommend it's strategic from the customer's perspective to get over to Power BI. Okay,
great. We have a question on, is the ALM toolkit available now? The application
yes, it is. Thank you for asking. In fact, I'm going to demo that. That is a perfect segue. Thank you for asking. I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you, because that happens to be close to my heart. Yeah.
That was Andrew, and then we do have a couple more questions coming up, but up to you whether you want to take them now or later.
Maybe I'll take one more, and I'm sure we'll have a few questions at the end, because I do have some amazing demos to show you, including the ALM toolkit.
Woohoo! Okay, one from Andy. I'm assuming this will help in the scenario that we have a new DAX metric to the model and used to reload all the cache history. Can you comment? Let me repeat that question. I'm assuming this will help in the scenario that we have a new DAX metric to the model and used to reload all cached history. Can you comment?
So I may need a little bit further info to answer that really effectively, but that could be asking about whether, because the XML endpoint gives you fine-grained refresh capabilities. It's not like you just refresh a data set. You can refresh partitions, you can refresh tables, you can even refresh just the data and refresh separate tables in a more efficient way, and then bring it all online by doing what we call a process recalc or a process automatic that then regenerates all of the in-memory kind of caches, and you can submit queries to generate caches. So yes, the XMLA endpoint gives you really fine-grained management capabilities of how you manage that in-memory cache. So yes.
So Andy, if you wanted to add some more to that, please do so in the chat window. And I think that was our last question before we go on to the exciting demos.
Brilliant. Okay, let's get cracking. So I'm assuming you can see my desktop. So I'm going to start off with the end user experience of these large enterprise scale semantic models that are consumed globally. So here we have the New York taxi dataset. Each row here in the trip table represents a New York taxi ride across a 10-year period. And this trip count measure gives us the count of all the rows in the trip table. So let's casually drag it onto the canvas and see how many rows we have in the table. Lo and behold, we have just over 3 billion rows, 3 billion with a B. This is about 1.8 terabytes of data in its raw uncompressed form. It compresses to about 70 gigabytes in the Power BI dataset, which we're going to look at in just a moment. And as you saw, I just got instant response times, instant gratification. That is how we like to do things in Power BI, instantly. So I'm going to break out revenue per trip, and I'm going to break it out by the top 10 zip codes. I can see that we have, and it's just a beautiful, seamless experience. We have latitude, longitude, and revenue. And let's break this out so we can see the pickup locations on a map. There we go. And we have just got a visualization of 3 billion data points with instant response times. We can now use the magic of cross-filtering in Power BI to see the pickup location with the highest revenue per trip. And this is real data, so we actually can zoom in. So we went from the 3 billion row aggregated cell value all the way down to the individual pickup locations. You can almost visualize the people running out on the freeway to catch the taxis, right? But the point being, we unlocked a massive data set with instant response times, just a seamless user experience. I like to call this clicky, draggy, droppy data analysis over massive data sets. It's an absolutely beautiful experience to unlock these massive data sets for global consumption. All right.
I think we need to hear that again. What's that, clicky?
This is in fact, we like to call this clicky, draggy, droppy data analysis over massive data sets. That's how we roll. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Kelly. And so we unlocked this massive data set. And how did we actually do this, right? So let me go into a little bit more detail. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you here that we can connect to SQL Server Management Studio, which you can see here in the background. So here's the Power BI workspace. Here are the data sets. I can copy this workspace connection into the clipboard. And you can see here that I'm actually connected to the same Power BI workspace connection, as though it were an analysis services server. In fact, SQL Server Management Studio and all of the non-Microsoft data visualization tools and Excel and all of these other tools, they just connect to the Power BI workspace as though it were an analysis services server. It looks like a duck. It quacks like a duck. Actually, it is a duck. This really is analysis services. It really is analysis services that is running right there behind Power BI. So you can see here that we have the 4 data sets. And here we have the New York taxi data set. And if I come to the properties, you can see that this data set is actually over 70 gigabytes in size. This is after compression. As I said earlier, this is about 1.8 terabytes in its raw uncompressed form. So how does this work? Who has a 70 gigabyte PBIX file? No one, or at least I don't. I don't have 100 gigabytes of memory on my laptop. Maybe I will one day, but in the meantime, what you can do is you can use incremental refresh, right? So with incremental refresh, you define an incremental refresh policy in your Power BI desktop file. At that point, your PBIX is nice and small, 20, 50 megabytes or so. You publish it to the service, right? It's still, 50 megabytes, but then you invoke a refresh and then it grows to this size, right? No one has a 70 gigabyte PBIX, so it grows to this size in the service after you published it, right? Now, in order, and the way it works is if I come here in SQL Server Management Studio, and I come to the partitions for the table, which I think I already have open, you can see here, excuse me, this table has a ton of partitions generated in it. So for the kind of hardened Pro BI practitioners that have used analytic services for a long time, they'll be very familiar with partitioning in analytic services, and they may well have had to write 1,000 lines of code to manage these partitions, right? To maintain rolling windows and do automatic partition merging for better compression and all of this management overhead, which quite often was about 1,000 lines of code, right? It was a lot of work to set this up. Well, with Power BI, you don't need to do that. We do it for you using incremental refresh. So how do you set that up? So I'll briefly show you. I'm going to come into my Power BI desktop file. So I have here my data set, and I can just come into incremental refresh and I can set up what we call an incremental refresh policy. So I might want to refresh the last 10 years. And then there's also a filter here that's set up in Power Query using a couple of reserved name parameters, range start, range end, which means that the data here in the Power BI desktop file will be, as I said, 20 to 50 megabytes, nice and small. No matter what refreshes I do here in Power BI desktop, it will always stay nice and small, right? But then I define this incremental refresh policy, and then I come to publish it to the service. And then after I invoke the refresh, then it grows to the large sizes. Now, I'd like to point out here that when I publish to the service, this dataset, as you just saw, has an incremental refresh policy in it. This is no longer limited only to workspaces on premium capacities. When we hit general availability for incremental refresh in February, we also opened it up on pro capacities, right? So that is a really good thing for the people that were asking about the pro capacities earlier. Now, I published this data set to the service. Just give me 1 second. This data set is still, let's say, under 50 megabytes in size. I cannot yet invoke the refresh. Let's say it's going to grow to the 70 gigabyte size. I cannot yet invoke the refresh until I enable it for using the large models feature. I need to enable it for large models, right? Now, in order to do that, I'm going to come back into the UI over here. And so in the near future, it will just be a simple toggle here in the dataset settings to say, optimize this dataset for large models. I would toggle it. There will be a workspace default as well. And then I publish it to the service, and then I just invoke the refresh. It grows to 70 gigabytes. In the meantime, whilst large models is still in public preview, what I have to do for now is I have to copy this GUID that is available here in the URL. That is the dataset GUID. And currently I have to run just a couple of PowerShell commandlets. You can use these for automation later as well, but in the meantime, this is the only way to set it. There's only 2 simple PowerShell commandlets. This one tells me the status of the dataset based on its ID, whether it's enabled for large models or not. And then this one actually sets it to be enabled for large models based on the dataset ID, right? So I published the dataset. First thing I did was I defined the incremental refresh policy. I published the data set. I then enabled it for large models, right? and then I invoked a refresh. It's now grown to 70 gigabytes in size with 3 billion rows. I've got a ton of users using it. They're unlocking this massive data set. Everyone's really happy about it. There's one last thing I want to do, and that is to enable this capacity for XMLA write for dataset management purposes and backwards compatibility with analysis services, tooling and processes, right? So for that, I can come into the admin portal for this particular capacity, and then I come down to the dataset settings, and we have this new drop down that is available as of about an hour ago. It should be it should be deployed to pretty much all of the regions by now. There may be a handful of regions that will be deployed in the next couple of hours, but most regions should already have this enabled. So by default, it would say XMLA endpoint read only. You need to set it to read write, okay? And you're done. Now you can use the analysis services tools and processes to manage this data set. So at this point, everyone's happy, right? I've deployed this data set. I've got users using it. They're doing clicky, draggy, droppy data analysis. Everyone's happy. You know, I'm feeling very proud of myself, and you know, everything's going well. What am I going to do? Well, actually, I've attracted a ton of new users, and I've now got users coming in from all over the world. You know, you speak in different languages, like Kelly was at the beginning. You know, we've got users who want to view these metrics using their local currencies. I want to make this a multicultural data set. How am I going to do that? Well, let's come back to Power BI desktop. So the first thing I want to enhance this data set, right? And I want to use some of the pro semantic modeling capabilities that are lighting up with the XMLA endpoints. Now, the first thing I have to do, and again, I'm just covering all the bases, then we're going to get to the really good stuff, first thing I have to do is I have to come into the options and settings to the preview features. And so there's this option right here to store the data set using enhanced metadata format. What this actually means is that the metadata of the data set will be stored using the tabular object model metadata standard, which Power BI has inherited from analysis services, right? So that's a simple checkbox. It doesn't make much difference in terms of the user experience in Power BI desktop, but what that does enable is what you'll see in a moment, is the third-party tool integration and the XMLA endpoint management, right? So I've set this up already. I've covered all my bases now. I've set up the XMLA endpoint. I've enabled the large models and everything. So I've done all the kind of prerequisites. So now let's get to the good stuff, right? The modeling. So I've got these currency tables here. So let's say this is one of my many fact tables. All of my fact tables are hanging off the date dimension. This particular one has a number of measures, which are currency-based measures like tax amount and total amount and recharge amount, etc. Right? So I want to apply currency conversion so that my users in different countries can see these currency-based measures using their local currencies, right? Now I happen to have a currency dimension, and I happen to have a currency rate, which holds all of the exchange rates, right? So what I want to do is I want to apply this currency conversion in a way that is reusable for all of the measures. I do not want to have to apply the currency conversion and copy and paste it for each of these measures. For these large semantic models, I could literally have thousands of measures. I don't want to have to do that. It would take a long time. So we launched a feature for analysis services in SQL Server Analysis Services 2019, and it's also in Azure Analysis Services called calculation groups. And the purpose of calculation groups is precisely that, to reuse calculation logic, to avoid the proliferation of measures, and simplify the consumption experience so that you don't have all of these proliferation measures, and you have a much more organized DAX calculations where you can define the DAX calculation once and have it reused for multiple measures. Right. The problem is that there is no authoring experience here in Power BI Desktop to author calculation groups. This happens to be one of the highest voted items on ideas.powerbi.com. Provide some way, just give me some way of enhancing my Power BI Desktop model using calculation groups. Well, guess what? You can do it with the XMLA endpoint, right? So I could publish this data set and use tools like community tools like Tabular Editor to enhance the dataset metadata after I publish. right? Or there's another thing that this is not being launched today. This will be launched this summer. So I'm going to zoom in here. Let's see, I'm going to zoom in over here. So you can see this new external tools ribbon. What on earth is that, I hear you ask? Well, let's find out. Let's go ahead and click on it and see what we have in here. Lo and behold, but many of you, I think we're already being asked about these. We were already asked about ALM Toolkit. We were asked about DAX Studio. This is the first, and Tabular Editor. This is the first time that this is being shown in a public setting. This is absolutely amazing. I want to really call out Daniel Otterkir. He's the author of Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor is recognized as probably the most advanced semantic modeling tool for analysis services model. Let's be honest, it is. It is the most powerful semantic modeling tool for analysis services tabular models. It is created primarily by Daniel Otterkir. We have much gratitude to Daniel for creating Tabular Editor, as well as for creating this external tools ribbon. Daniel actually created the external tools ribbon as part of the Power BI contributor program. Is that amazing or what? Much respect. Round of applause to Daniel. You know, we can't express our gratitude enough for the work that he did here. This is so significant because it allows you to enhance the metadata of the Power BI dataset with these advanced semantic modeling capabilities and actually embed those capabilities right there in the dataset. Make this put the currency conversion right there in the dataset. Put the translations right there in the dataset, so that the dataset becomes a multicultural dataset. Wherever that dataset goes, whatever services it gets deployed to, whatever environments, whatever choices it makes in its life, it will always be a multicultural data set. And it's so we are very grateful to Daniel for doing this work, as well as DAX Studio, the infamous DAX Studio that is used. The usage goes through the roof of DAX Studio in terms of the ability to author DAX queries, optimize bottlenecks, you know, figure out where the aggregation hits are being hit, etc. And ALM Toolkit, which I think it was created by some dude called Christian Wade. I don't. He calls himself the real Christian Wade. I don't know. Anyway, we'll come back to that one. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and just open up Tabular Editor, and as you can see, it's actually connected straight to the analysis services instance that's running right here behind Power BI Desktop. Some of the pros on the call will know that even behind Power BI Desktop, there is an analysis services instance running right there, right? And so that's exactly what Tabular Editor is connected to. So if I open up the tables and the game, you can see that these are the same tables, the same columns, right? So what I want to do is I want to use Tabular Editor to enhance this model to add in calculation groups for currency conversion. So I'm going to go ahead and say, create new calculation group. We'll call this currency conversion. If I can spell it right, there we go. And then now we can add a calculation item called converted currency. And then I can put in my DAX logic in here. I happen to have one ready already in the interest of time. So I'm going to exit from here. I'm going to switch over to this desktop instance, which is exactly the same as where we were just a moment ago. I'm going to open up Tabular Editor. Again, it's going to be immediately connected to the analysis services instance running right here behind Power BI Desktop. And in this case, I've already got the calculation group and the calculation items defined. So here is my converted currency calculation item. So I'll briefly cover this, that what we're doing here, this is a DAX calculation. So this will be evaluated for each cell in the output of a query. And so the first thing we are doing is we are inspecting the currency that is currently in filter context. If there is a single currency in context and it happens to be US dollars, we don't actually need to do anything because the data in the fact table is already stored as US dollars. And surprisingly, we don't need to convert US dollars to US dollars. So in that case, we just return the selected measure amount, which is US dollars. However, if there is a single currency in context and it is not US dollars, then what we would do instead is we would invoke this branch of the if evaluation, we would invoke the SumX iterator, and the SumX iterator will iterate over each of the dates that are currently in filter context. So for example, if I have a filter of January, we would iterate 31 times, once for each date, right? So, and then for each date, we will take the US dollar amount and we will divide it by the end of day rate for that date, for that currency, right? And then once we're done with each of the dates, we sum up the results to the month level, if the current filter is at the month level, right? It's much more accurate to do it at the dates level and sum up the results to the month level than to try and do it at the month level, because we wouldn't allow for fluctuations in the currency exchange rates. Okay, so that's my calculation group and calculation item that I can define once for all of the measures in my Power BI dataset. Extremely powerful for these large scale enterprise semantic models that could have hundreds of tables and thousands of measures with lots of reusable logic. Things like time intelligence, you know, year to date, month to date, 3-month moving average. All of these things want to be applied to pretty much all of the measures. I don't want to have to do it. I don't want to have separate measures for each of those. I can just create calculation items that covers me, and all of the measures can subscribe to that calculation logic, right? Now, another thing I'd like to point out here is the format string, and this format string is going to be dynamically evaluated. This is the only way to get true dynamic formatting of measures in Power BI is using calculation groups. So here it's going to pluck out the format string from the currency table. Well, what's in there? Well, we have DAX Studio right here. Let's find out. So again, the DAX Studio was created by Darren Gospel primarily as the primary contributor. And so again, I'm immediately, you can see how powerful this is. I'm immediately connected to the Analytic Services instance running right here behind Power BI Desktop. And then we can just, and this is obviously scratching the surface of what you can do with DAX Studio, but you can see here that the format strings are stored in the currency table. Okay, that's all great. So everything's good there. I've set up my currency conversion, but I want to go further than that. I've got users in different countries. They want to see the currency measures using their local currencies, but they want to actually see the report, the data set metadata. They want to see the report using their local languages, right? We want to speak in the, just like Kelly was talking at the beginning, we in Power BI, we are multicultural. We like our reports to be multilingual reports, and we like to create multilingual data sets. Well, you may know that the Analysis Services engine supports metadata translations. However, there is an issue with Azure Analysis Services and SQL Server Analysis Services. You can actually define the metadata translations in the Analysis Services dataset, and other tools like Excel would observe them. However, the Power BI service does not observe them because there's extra work to do in the caching layers. But a little known fact is that if the data set is in a Power BI premium capacity, then translations are actually observed, right? The same translations that are defined in the Analysis Services engine are actually observed by the Power BI service. So how do we get the translations into the data set? You know, there's no translations authoring experience in Power BI Desktop. No problem. Tabular editor, you know where we're going, right? So, you know, we have Italiano, we have Ania Holla da Beribrit, we have Parlez-vous français? J'adore Power BI car il est très joli. Vamos a hablar en español, muchachos y muchachas, vámonos. We have Portuguese, Brasileiro. I'm even going to, for our friends in China, Tsun Gurun Dai Biao, Tsun Gurun, no, Tsun Gurun Dai Biao, Tsun Gurun Mi. That's my, you know, we are with you at this time. You know, we will overcome all of this together. And so we like to create multicultural, multilingual data sets. I'm going to go ahead and select Português, Brasileiro, Português, Carioca. All right, galera, vambora, não é brincadeira, vambora. All right, so we have a Portuguese speaking data set. All of our tables, our columns, everything is now in Brazilian Portuguese. Is this amazing or what? Now, all I have to do is save this to the Power BI dataset, and it instantly becomes a multicultural dataset. These translations are embedded in the dataset metadata. Whatever choices that this dataset makes in its life, it will always be a multilingual dataset. And to illustrate that even better, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come over here. You won't believe this, right? You won't believe this. Right, I'm going to switch back to no translation for a minute. And so watch this, right? Keep an eye out on the field list on the background, right? So again, this is connected to the local Power BI desktop instance. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe, I don't know, create a display folder. Why not? Let's call this my revenue measures, all right? Now, I'm going to go ahead and click save and just keep an eye on the background. What just happened there? Oh, it's still called new folder, but that's okay. I can rename this to revenue measures, and then save it again. And you just keep an eye out here in the background. And you can see it actually updated the field list in real time. Is that amazing or what? Daniel, I don't know how you did this, but this is just amazing. Like how it's actually updated. Even check this out. Look, check this surprises me every time I use it. So you can see here recharge amount. Let's say hypothetically that that there's some royalty that we're paying on recharge amount of 10%, and we want to subtract that from the number that we're reporting. So we're just going to multiply it by 0.9 to take out the royalty. I'm going to go ahead and save it and just keep an eye here on the recharge amount value. And instantly it gets updated. This is amazing. We get instant synchronization of the report data of the field list with the changes that you make in Tabular Editor. Is that amazing or what? So think of the scenarios that this opens up. I can have Tabular Editor on one monitor. I can have Power BI Desktop on another one. I can validate all the work I'm doing in Tabular Editor on one monitor using my report in Power BI Desktop in another one. I can get the modeling view in Power BI Desktop. This is truly, you know, this extends the semantic modeling capability of Power BI no end, right? This is truly fantastic. So let's say I've done all this. I'm super proud of myself. I'm so excited about empowering. You know, by the way, this is how we empower every person, every organization on the planet to achieve more. This is how we roll. So I want to now roll this out to all of my users all across the whole planet, right? I want to empower all my users across the planet. So what am I going to do? I'm going to come in and I'm going to hit publish, right? And so everything's good. I'm getting ready to go and celebrate, right? And I want to publish this data set to I've already got a version out there that we saw earlier, that we set up earlier, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and publish this as soon as the deployment. So there it is. I'm going to go ahead and click select. And what's going on here? It's telling me that I already have a version of the data set on the service. I know that's the one we optimized earlier. That's now, 3 billion rows that is, that we enable for large models. And it says you already have a version of it. Do you want to replace it? No, I don't. This is my 50 gigabyte model here in Power BI, 50 megabyte model here in Power BI Desktop. The thing in the service is 70 gigabytes. I don't want to replace it because I don't want to wait 5 hours to refresh that all over again. I want to do an incremental metadata only deployment, right? That is going to retain all of that historical data, right? Well, guess what? There's an app for that too. Right, there's an app for that, as we like to say. There's an app called the ALM Toolkit. So I'm going to open this guy up. I'm immediately connected to the local Power BI Desktop instance, just like the other tools, and I can go ahead and perform a schema comparison. So this is a schema diff tool. Schema comparisons are a mature market for relational databases. Like when you deploy a new version of a data warehouse, you don't reload all of the data. You don't drop the database and reload all the data from scratch. That could take weeks, right? So what you do is you will quite often create an incremental schema diff script to go and bring the metadata of the data warehouse up to the latest version. That's exactly what this tool does, right? So here it's done a comparison of all of the objects in the Power BI dataset. So if I make this nice and big, let's see, for example, the game table is the one that here you can see the refresh policy. This is the Tabular object model metadata. This is why we had to enable that enhanced metadata as the preview feature. And if I come down here, we can see that the version of the table in the service has a ton of partitions. These are the same partitions that we were looking at in SQL Server Management Studio. Guess what? I don't want to lose those partition definitions because I don't want to have to reload all the data. Well, guess what? I don't have to. I just say skip selected objects. It's skipped. I don't need to mess with it. I'm going to hide skip objects to focus just on the differences. So we can see here we've got the Portuguese translations, And up here, we've got the calculation item for the currency conversion. And then, so here we've got the recharge amount that is now multiplying by 0.9. For whatever reason, the business hasn't quite signed off on this royalty thing. So this is still in development. I don't want to deploy these measures right now. I don't have to. Skip them, no problem, right? Now I can just perform a validation that will validate the actions that I'm going to take on the target model to ensure the integrity of the target model. This is going to do a complete impact analysis across the whole dependency tree, all of the Power Queries that depending on another Power Query, name collisions, requirements for calculation groups in terms of, all of the dependencies are going to be checked. And so if something is not going to violate the integrity of the target model, it won't allow you to take that action. For example, if I skip the ignored implicit measures, which is a requirement for the calculation groups, and I run this validation again, it says, sorry, you can't deploy the calculation groups because you don't have discourage implicit measures set to true, right? So I can now just put this back again. I'll go ahead and update, run the validation again. Everything should be good. And now I can go ahead and generate an XMLA script that I can run from SQL Server Management Studio. I can hand it to a DBA for automation, etc. Or I can just go ahead and update the target. So now go ahead and apply that metadata change. Depending on the settings, it will also do a small refresh. I'll just take a sip of my water. And in just one moment, we'll be able to go ahead and look at the report. There we go. If I refresh this comparison, we should see that all of the objects that we deployed to the target are now the same, like the currency conversion, like the Portuguese translations. And if we come to those that we skipped, like the game table, you can see that they're still different and we still have those partitions in the target. So we retained that 70 gigabytes, that 3 billion rows of data. Okay, so everything's great. So now we've done that, we want to see what it looks like for the end users, right? So I'm going to come over here to my report that is published. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the currency into the columns of this matrix. You can see that everything is now converted. Again, this will work for all of the measures in the data set. It's not for one particular measure. And you can see that not only is the currency converted, but even the currency symbols are using the foreign currency foreign currency symbols. And this is the only way to get true dynamic formatting in Power BI, unlike some of the workarounds before calculation groups, like the format function that would return a string, that would mean that you would not be able to visualize that data using a visual that requires a numeric data type, right? Like the funnel and other ones, all right? So everything's good there. Got the currency conversion set up. Now, what I want to do is see what it looks like using my foreign language, right? So I'm going to come into the users in the different countries would just pick it up from the browser, but I'm going to override that here. So I'm going to come down, and we were looking at Português Brasileiro. We'll go ahead and apply. Carregando. And there we go. Alertas, assinaturas, painéis. We now come back over here. We refresh this and let's see what happens. Lo and behold, this is no longer a financial gaming report. This is now, after it's finished carregando dados, this will now be a quasi concluído. This will be, once it refreshes, it will be a relatório financeiro de jogos. There we go. And everything is in Portuguese. The metadata of the data set, etc. And if I come to edit mode, you'll see that the tables, the columns, everything is in Brazilian Portuguese, and my Brazilian users are now very happy. We have a multicultural data set. So thank you very, very much for that. All right, so that's the translations, the currency conversion. The last thing I'm going to demo before we open it up for questions is, if I have an analysis services model and I'm using SQL Server data tools and I'm deploying it to Azure Analysis Services, I want to migrate that model over to Power BI so that I can benefit from all the amazing features that I get in Power BI, like translations, right? That only works in Power BI datasets in terms of the Power BI service, like incremental refresh, right? Like these features. Then what am I going to do? Well, I can just come into SQL Server data tools, right? And where I would place the Azure Analysis Services server, I can now just put in that very same workspace URL that we connected from SQL Server Management Studio, right? So as you can see here, this is the workspace URL, right? And I can just go ahead and deploy just like I would to Azure Analysis Services. And as of today, you can, as long as you enable that XMLA read-write capability, you can now deploy from SQL Server data tools straight to Power BI Workspace, so that you can easily migrate those analysis services models straight over to Power BI. You can see I've got a little alert here in the background. The data set has just been deployed. So just whilst that's loading, I'm going to come in here. If I refresh this, we should see the new data set. There's going to be some, there it is. There's the new data set we just deployed. All right. And back over here, we deployed it successfully. So again, SQL Server data tools can now deploy straight to Power BI. So you have the Power BI data set that was authored in SQL Server data tools, as well as Tabular editor. There's lots of users that are authoring the analysis services models using Tabular editor. That can just deploy to Power BI now as well. All of those analysis services tools and processes, integration with source control, DevOps, automation, etc. All of that now works in Power BI. Is that amazing or what? So with that, I've got 2 minutes left for questions. I've probably overrun a little bit. I just want to show you real quick that there are some links here for further info, and these documents will be kept up to date. These are the main landing pages. And with that, I'll open it up for questions for the last 2 minutes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. So, super exciting. Number one, Christian's linguistic skills. I'm not sure if you're a polyglot or not, but, I love that. Daniel Oettinger, you're a champion. You're an absolute champion. So thank you so much. And let's get on with some questions. Okay. XMLA read only has been in preview for a very long time. I'm nervous every time I have to get out an endpoint. How long do you anticipate until everything goes GA?
So XMLA read-only will GA along with the XMLA read-write capability. And currently, we are planning to do that by the end of September. Obviously, due to the current climate, we haven't yet, figured out exactly if there's going to be any impact to our deliverables. But without any impact to our schedule, we plan to have large models and XMLA read-only and read-write all in general availability by the fall. That's the current plan.
Fantastic. Okay, what about costs? Premium is a little more expensive than AAS. When will you choose which?
Okay, so there are many factors here. If you just look at the like-for-like hardware, it seems more expensive. But obviously, as we saw in the slide earlier, there is a lot more that you get with Power BI for a start. And also, you may not need as much hardware because of capabilities like dynamic memory management to swap data sets in and out of memory, and composite models and aggregations. Right, so it's really an apples and oranges comparison off the bat. However, we do realize that there is a need for an Azure-based service, and we may at some point revamp analysis services to some degree. That all of this has not been fully defined, but it is safe to say one thing, that whether it be through the Azure-based service or whether it be through Power BI Premium, at some point, everything will work the Power BI way. We like the Mandalorian. This is the way. It's the Power BI way. So we plan to continue to offer an Azure-based service. The details will be finalized later, but there's one thing for certain. It will be the Power BI way, which means it is strategic to at least evaluate moving over to Power BI. It's very strategic from the standpoint of that's where the investment is going in the future. It will probably avoid a migration down the road. So it's a good idea to evaluate Power BI if you can. And again, it's really an apples and oranges comparison if you look for like hardware. And that's all the information I have right now. But yeah, absolutely. Again, it's an apples and oranges comparison. You get so much more with Power BI.
Excellent. Okay, we are going to stick around for a couple more minutes to answer. We're going to do about between 5 and 10 questions. I know we have 21. We'll get through them as quickly as we can. Will there be an export from Arias Model and Import into Power BI?
Okay, that's a good question. So if you saw the way that we used the third-party tool integration like Tabular Editor, it was modifying the analysis services instance behind Power BI Desktop. Now, for the first release of that will only support calculation groups, translations, and perspectives. Over time, we want Power BI Desktop to be fully hardened to external model changes, so you can download to PBIX from an XMLA modified file. Well, once you can do that, once we get to download to PBIX from an XMLA modified file. So initially, as soon as you make a modification with XMLA, you won't be able to download to Power BI Desktop. So if you're in that situation, you'd better keep a copy of the PBIX. But once we make that happen, which we absolutely intend to do, then think about it. We will then easily be able to take a model that is deployed from SSDT to the Power BI service and then download to either Power BI, PBIX or maybe PBIT. We'll see. So we plan to fully bridge that gap to allow analysis services customers to get all the way over to the Power BI tooling to really increase that value proposition. There is a lot of work to finish that, so we don't have a time frame right now, but it is on the roadmap.
Okay, excellent. Since we could really mess up our models in Power BI Premium now, can we lock what can be replaced by Power BI Desktop to avoid having to reload a large model in Power BI Premium?
Lock what we do in Power BI Desktop to avoid loading a large model in Power BI Premium. I'm not sure I fully understand that. Yes, go ahead.
Shall we get Steve to write on our blog?
If you could elaborate a little bit more on that. I'm not sure what you mean by locking it. You would need to, deploy it and then refresh it to get it to the large sizes, and then you would need to do incremental metadata deployment, which would by definition modify if you want to make changes to it, you need to have a way of making changes to it without losing the data, which was that kind of ALM toolkit scenario. So I'm not 100% sure what exactly is behind that question, but if you want to elaborate, I'd be happy to answer.
Okay, great. What Skew shall we use to get instant response time over 3 billion rows?
Well, that was a P3 capacity with 100 gigabytes of memory. That was a 70 gigabyte model. That's about as far as you can go on a P3 with 100 gigabytes because it needs some extra memory for refreshes and for caches, so that was a P3 with 100 gigabytes.
Okay. Why did you choose the workspace name as part of the connection name? We have a lot of workspaces with the same name.
Yes, well, actually, this will be addressed with the new version of Workspaces that we're moving away from the Microsoft Office groups. Internally we call them the Workspace V2, but the new version of Workspaces. If you create a second workspace and both of them happen to be the new type of workspace, if one of them is the old one, it doesn't apply, right? But if you have a second workspace and both of them are the new type of workspace and you try and rename it to be the same name as the existing one, the UI will impose a validation and it will disallow you from doing that. Now, if you have the old form of workspace that was migrated, or is still the old form of Workspace, you can have name collisions. We address that's in the documentation. You can actually append the Workspace GUID to the end to uniquely identify it. But as I say, this should be cleaned up going forward, because the UI will disallow workspaces with the same name for a particular customer tenant.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there a timeline for making these capabilities available in Power BI embedded?
Yes, in fact, they are available today because the embedded ASKUs are basically fully featured premium as an Azure-based service. So in fact, the demo that I did was actually on an ASKU, because it's super easy to just spin up and do demos on and pause in Azure when you're done. So yes, it's available today in the ASKU, in the embedded ASKUs.
Fantastic. Where is the memory coming from when P3 only has 32 gig of memory?
P3 has 100 gig of memory. So, and depending on how many data sets you have, if you have a single data set, you can get up to a maximum of about 70. So yeah, P3 has 100 gigabytes of memory.
Okay. Are the external tools out of the box available when installing Power BI Desktop?
No, so the external tools you can install today, but they are separate to Power BI Desktop today, and you can actually connect them to the Power BI Desktop instance. And if you have that enhanced metadata format, you can actually see the metadata, and you can, LM Toolkit, if it's the source of the comparison, will actually work. But we will this summer. We will do a blog post. Daniel Ottiker may be doing a guest blog post about this at some point. And we will have a documentation article that shows you the whole extensibility model for Power BI Desktop. You can actually create other tools that hook into that extensibility model, and will show up right there on that external tools ribbon. It's not even just those three. Those three are going to be in the documentation that you can just go over to their website, download the installer, install them, and they will just show up in the external tools ribbon. But you will even have the ability to create your own tools that show up in that ribbon, and all of that will be announced around the summer.
Excellent. Is there a connection from ALM Toolkit to Git, preferably automatic?
Not automatic, but you can absolutely, you can have ALM Toolkit. For example, I think I have it still open. You can create the source or target to be a PBIT or a BIM file, and so you can, or you can of course just save as PBIT from Power BI Desktop. But then it will work offline without requiring an analysis services instance. You can do those comparisons. It can also be automated using the command line, and so you can do diff and merge across repos. But you just need the repo instantiated on the local system. On the local file system.
Okay, please clarify whether external tools feature is dependent upon the XMLA Readwrite endpoint, or whether this will be standard feature of the Power BI Desktop. It looks like the ALM example with an XMLA script would be dependent in order to deploy the metadata only, but an attempt to overwrite an existing data model seems to be possible without a Readwrite endpoint.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're absolutely right. Those external tools will work in Power BI Desktop that is not running in a pro capacity or the premium capacity, obviously. So you can use, DAX Studio to query the local analytic services instance that's running in Power BI Desktop. There are some things that you may be able to do to get into the metadata of the data set and still publish it to pro. But certainly something like ALM Toolkit that connects dynamically to the service will require the XMLA endpoint, so would therefore require premium capacity.
Great news. Okay, can you connect Tabular Editor directly to models in Power BI service?
Yes, you can. Just like analysis services. Same with LM Toolkit, same with DAX Studio. You can just connect them using that workspace URL, just like analysis services. So if many customers are using Tabular Editor for analysis services semantic modeling today, they don't need to change their process. You know, they integrate with Git and have automated builds and use Tabular editor and all of the command line interfaces, and all of that just works the same way. It is analysis services, and you just connect to it as though it were analysis services.
So Andy said the ALM toolkit is all I need. I just downloaded it, so that's fantastic news.
Brilliant, good job.
Couple more
Nice
questions. Will the incremental refresh work for sources like Snowflake and Google and BigQuery?
So, excuse me. The scope of data sources has was limited in certain circumstances. If you had a composite model, that has now been that restriction has been lifted, but it does work primarily on data sources that have a compute engine or a compute layer, and so not all of them do. So it requires query folding to push those filters, because for each of those partitions, they will have a separate query issued for each partition, and it needs the filter included in the query. All right, so in many cases, it depends on query folding, which really depends on the capabilities of the data source. It can sometimes depend on the complexity of the Power Query. There are some workarounds where you can kind of inject the filter based off the range start, range end parameters for some of the in some kind of rare scenarios where query folding would otherwise not work, but it does depend on the capabilities of the data source. So unfortunately, it's not a one size fits all answer. And the query diagnostic capability in Power Query can actually be used to detect whether query folding is occurring now.
Okay. Can it handle a 700 gig model and be performant? We need more memory than a P3. Suggestions?
700 gig. Wow.
That's Jim Cush.
Respect, Jim. Yeah.
And how do we replace the S9 we are using?
Okay, fair enough, Jim. So we do actually have a P5 that is only available on special request, and you know that kind of the landscape of the SKUs may be and the hardware may be updated at some point. But even the S9 and S9 V2, they have 400 gigabytes. They don't quite have the 700 gigabytes. And you know, as you saw, I had 1.8 terabytes compressed to 70 gigabytes. Right, so you can actually compress a lot of data. And for those really massive data sets, you might want to consider things like composite models and aggregations to not have to cache all of that data into memory. Because even if you had a terabyte of memory, there is a management overhead of replicating it into memory. But we do plan to address that. We don't have a time frame right now. You may have heard of the plans for the enhanced dynamic memory management, the same way that Power BI swaps data sets in and out of memory on an on-demand basis. We will actually allow that to happen on subsets of data sets. So you could have, you know, a 700 gigabyte data set, potentially even on a P3, and it doesn't all need to be loaded at one time. But we haven't done that work yet. We don't have a time frame for that right now. It's absolutely on the roadmap. We've been quite clear that that's on the roadmap. In the meantime, there are big SKUs. There's large models that can actually get you to many terabytes of data uncompressed. You know, most models would easily be covered. And for those that really can't, because you're talking about multi-petabyte scale data sources or data sets in the source, for those you can use composite models and aggregations so that you don't need to cache all of the data into memory, and you still get to unlock these massive data sets. And it's actually a lot cheaper and easier to manage as well.
Awesome. Now, we do have a few more questions. So we've gone almost 15 minutes over. What would you like to do? Would you like to have folks just go to the blog and post their questions there, Christian?
You can absolutely do that. Maybe I'll take one more question and we'll call it a day. But yeah, you can absolutely post to the blog as well. So I've just, the XMLA Readwrite blog post has just been posted. So go and take a look.
Excellent. And, do you have a link to that?
The documents have just been updated. The incremental refresh document will be updated in a couple of days, and it will actually have the instructions on how to do that incremental metadata only deployment using the ALM toolkit. There'll be a little screenshot of it in there because that's so relevant to incremental refresh, to not have to reload all that historical data. So that will be, and in fact, if I show you here, if I come back.
Is that your
Yeah.
March 26 blog post? I have a link to that. I'll pop that in the window so then folks can respond to you there.
That is the XMLA announcement blog post. This is a link to the XMLA landing page that has all of the. Oh, you're not seeing it?
Oh, there we are. Got it. Yep.
Okay, great. So this is a link to the XMLA landing page. This is a link to the incremental refresh page, and this one will actually in the coming days we'll actually have instructions on how to do incremental metadata only deployments using the ALM toolkit.
Okay. Did we say we're going to do one more?
Yes, I can take one more. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Sorry for the noob questions. Will XMLA Readwrite allow finally for the mashup of live connects to Power BI models with external, say, flat file or data sources? I think we did answer that one, didn't we?
So that is actually covered by a separate feature, which is actually listed in the release plan. If you go to this link here, Power Platform, aka.ms/Power Platform release plan, that is the composite models, kind of the new version of composite models that is coming out sometime this calendar year. The timeframes are on the release plan. That is actually a separate feature to the XMLA endpoint. That's more of a client-side integration feature. So that's separate, but that is on the release plan.
Excellent news. Well, look, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I really appreciate you spending the time here with us. You can spend your time, you can choose to spend your time anywhere, and you chose it to spend it with us. So it's wonderful that you did so. Special thanks to Christian and Daniel and Deepak as well for helping us with the calls. And again, we're with you during these difficult times. Είμαστε μαζί σας αυτούς τους δύσκολους καιρούς. And yeah, and for the Chinese person that was said that we spoke really well, or that Christian spoke really well, hoping to meet you one day in person or over the webinar. And 我很高兴见到你.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to close the call?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it.